Welcome to VintageTech, where it's time to be cool and talk about the Compact Cassette, the music format of choice from the 1960s all the way up to 2000s, and with new indie songs being made today. Now, much like the Game Boy, and by extension the Game Boy Color episodes of VintageTech, I won't talk about the full history about it, but I will, however, mention some other types of cassettes. Anyway, let's start the episode. Now, before the cassette came to be, recording on tape existed back in 1945 using these large open reels, or was known as reel-to-reel tape recording. These reels were inconvenient to set up, so a more convenient tape cartridge system was proceeded, starting with the RCA Victor tape cartridge, introduced in 1958, but we'll get back to that. In 1963, the Philips release was known as the Compact Cassette, which was a massive success, at least when pre-recorded cassettes came into play. Initially, the Compact Cassette was supposed to be used for dictation.
And given the speed being 178 centimeters per second, it makes sense.
And was learned that Sony, the company that also did DVD, mini discs, and UMD formats as seen in episode 5, 18, and 15 respectively, teamed up with Philips to freely license the format out, resulting in pre-recorded music albums and recordable tapes that do not bear a Compact Cassette name. The success of Compact Cassette made these tapes universally named cassette. This partnership, coincidentally, led to Sony creating a wildly successful product, the Walkman. A lot of music players still going strong to this day. In fact, Sony still makes the Walkman as an MP3 player. The Compact Cassette is the most well-known of the recording tape cartridge stuff. There are also other types of cassettes, for recording music or saving data. For this episode, while the focus is on the Compact Cassette, I will also mention the Minicassette, Microcassette, the aforementioned RCA Victor tape cartridge, Elcaset, NT tape, and the DECO cassette system. The biggest competitor for the Compact Cassette were these 8-track tapes, which was the music format of choice in the car. These things run twice as speed for Compact Cassette, and sound better. These things have 4 stereo programs, hence the name 8-track. But because this is an endless tape cartridge, they can't be rewound. And also, given the fact Compact Cassette improved technology over time, these things were a bit obsolete. Anyway, I'll discuss the 8-track in a separate video. But that's enough about that. Let's talk about the Compact Cassette itself. And we'll start this journey. Let's start with the thing that is generally referred to as a cassette, the Compact Cassette. Let's look at the design. The example tape shown is a C90 Type 1, also known as a ferric type cassette, from Maxell, which I got in a 5-pack in 2020 at local CVS when I was originally in Virginia. A compact cassette consists of 2... Oh, Jesus Christ, my neighbors, can you? The Compact Cassette consists of 2 spools that have tape on one side, and as the cassette is played, it gets moved to the other spool. Now, it may seem simple and all, but how does the tape get played on a player/recorder? Well, at the bottom of the cassette tape, they explain themselves. Look at the 3 large square openings. On the right is where the pinch roll and capstan rotate to move the tape to the other spool. It works to cut shut engine moves in the cassette deck. So if you're wondering why cassette tapes have these holes, you don't know why. The gap in the middle is where the playhead squeezes into. It allows for the audio to play and record. More on that shortly. However, some high-end tape recorders use separate record and playheads, squeezed into a single head. Regardless of type, the playhead uses half the width of the tape to achieve longer playing time. This is also why a cassette can be flipped over to play the other side. To prevent damage to the cassette housing and the tape itself, a sponge pad is present for the playhead to rest on. Early tapes had the pads glued down, while later tapes were reinforced with springs, something borrowed from a former rival to the Compact Cassette, the DC International. Now you may be wondering, how to play and record on the tape? Well, that is where the hole on the left works. That is for the erase head to erase the old audio on one side. Inexpensive cassette recorders mainly use a permanent magnet, mechanically moved on the cassette, while more premium ones use a high-frequency signal on said erase head. Either way, recording the tape may seem simple and all, but you may be worried about accidentally recording on a pre-recorded cassette tape. Well, they thought of that thanks to these 2 holes on the top. They're known as write protect notches. There are 2 on the top for 1 on each side. Now, how does write protection work? Well, here's a standard boombox, complete with SpongeBob theme. The cassette mechanism doesn't work, unfortunately. Yeah, let's not get ahead of ourselves. But cheaper cassette decks often use a belt mechanism that can wear down over time, resulting in wound flutter. But let me show you how can the recording work on tape. If you attempt to press the record button down, it won't budge. You may be wondering how it can be pressed down fully. Well, there's this little switch that's depressed by default, allowing for pre-recorded cassettes to play without any harm. But if record tape is inserted, it presses the switch, mechanically or electrically, feeding the record button, and you can record the tape. Now, if you want to protect your beautiful audio recording, you can break one of the tabs, preventing any accidental recordings.
Okay, now that I got the SpongeBob boombox away, and by that I mean it was teleported out, let's see what a cassette player might look like. Now, I want to show you, actually didn't have its cassette function working, at least in the beginning. So instead, I'm going to show you this. This is actually a record Walkman, a TCS 30D. Now, I didn't realize this was actually a more modern Walkman. We have fast forward, rewind, play, stop, and record, which bulges until you press, until record with cassette, pretty much unbroken, presses the switch. It's actually one of the Walkmans that have a speaker, which is a good thing too. And also, this switch can you can actually set length time, normal and double. And a fair warning, if you set it to double, the cassette will only work on this Walkman unless if the cassette player also has this thing. That's for speed control. And then this is a pause function. Now, how do pauses actually work in cassette players like these? Well, this one uses a switch, so if you press it, and why add a core version? Well, in addition to being a playable Walkman, it's also a dictation voice recorder. Something Sony still sells. In fact, let me show you guys something. This voice recorder actually made its return, which I will already mention later on. Anyway, let's demonstrate cassette tape. Let's pull up into C90. Oh, sorry, I had to put it my... Now, fair disclaimer, I actually record the audio first, prior to doing these. So, I think I already mentioned that. Oh, bother, I think I forgot.
A brain drain!
Anyway, let's put the cassette in and press play.
So, as I mentioned, the tape runs and records analog signals at 1 7/8 inches per second. For those in metric territories, that's 4.7625 per second. Now let's do some math to see how long the tape is on each cassette. 1 7/8 inches times 60 seconds is equals to 102.5 inch per minute. Now let's multiply that by the length of minutes per side. In this case, this is a 9-minute cassette with 45 minutes per side. 112.5 times 45 equals to about 5,062.5 inches or 421.875 feet of tape. Feet, of course, refers to the length in the imperial measurement system and not that DeviantArt crap. All of see our tape measurements on screen in this spreadsheet I wrote. Now there was 120 and 180 minute cassette tapes that held 60 and 90 minutes per side respectively, but it comes at the cost of making the tape more fragile. In fact, most tape recorders actually warn against using them.
Now, how does the music audio compare to today's digital streams? Well, let's use one of Anders Jensen's soundtracks, and I'll be comparing them together. Now, full disclaimer, I bought the soundtrack both digitally and physically on cassette on his Bandcamp. Okay, one thing I completely overlooked on this Walkman was the speed control, which I did mention, but The mere present speed of the speed control, it is the reason why some compact pre-recorded cassettes can't be played properly. I said the middle, which I thought was correct, but after this, it turns out it was normal speed when I played at Petsky Robots. So, that's my mistake. Anyway, let's go ahead and... Oh, facing cameras. Yeah. Move right. Yeah. Anyway, I'll just snap when I start my fingers, we'll jump to it. Well, now you hear the difference between analog tape and digital stream. Oh, if you want to check out Anders' other soundtrack, please check the link in the description. If you could buy them, that is. Now, if you thought the Type 1 cassette was the only one of its kind, well, you haven't seen the other types yet. In addition to Type 1 cassette tapes mentioned in that section, there are also Type 2, Type 3, and Type 4, known as chromium, ferrochromium, and metal tapes. These tapes sounded better than the Type 1 cassette. What's the difference between these tapes and the Type 1 physically? Well, there are extra holes on the top to indicate which cassette is which, as well as darker tape. The darker the tape, the better the sound is. It's important to remember that if you want to record or play on those tapes, the player/recorder must be compatible with them. The same is true if the player has a Dolby Noise Reduction, or DNR for short.
Yeah, you can actually get CD quality audio using analog cassettes. What made these better quality sound tapes useful was recorded from the radio for a hard copy of the music being played. Incidentally though, the mere presence of recordable tapes and making it illegal to record copyrighted audio is what led to the infamous home taping is killing music protests in the UK, as I mentioned in the mini-disc episode. Unlike modern day piracy where it's a hydra, and one of the only ways to preserve media, music piracy died down nowadays since there are lots of good artists to support.
Yeah, you can tell these record labels didn't like recordable cassettes. So up until iTunes came into play, they would do very clever copyright protections that would be defeatable or not defeatable by pirates. Oh, and speaking of which, there's one more use for these compact cassettes, which we'll talk about right now. Cassette tapes aren't just used for audio recording or music, they can also be used for data storage on computers. They can provide a cheaper alternative to these floppy disks, but not without some caveats. They are very slow. I mean, no surprise, since they run at 1/7/8 inches per second. But also, unlike the business level tape drives and digital tape storage, they don't have any sort of random access. So it's the user who gets the final program set on the computer. On the flip side, the program is actually loaded into the computer's RAM, unlike cartridges. There are two different types of connectors for tape drives, analog and digital. Analog is an obvious one, and simple. You just need any tape recorder, plug the microphone and headphone to the sockets in, and plug them into the input and output. Side note, some computers require a breaker cable to use. To use the tape deck, type a command that allows loading of tapes. Press play on the cassette recorder, wait a few moments, and you're good to go. However, you got to have the volume and tone set correctly, or else the tape won't load. That's the advantage of a digital connector, used on both Commodore and Atari computers. It was a little simpler and more effective than the analog connection, since they didn't require sending the audio. As such, there was no loading errors. Cassette storage for 8-bit computers had a use in both the UK and Australia, since they were cheaper compared to floppies, most notably the ZX Spectrum.
Now, what will happen when you put a cassette designed for computers in a standard cassette player? Well, this is going to be allowed, so now's the time to lower the volume. Right about now. Glad that is over, so now's the time to turn your volume back up. Anyway, those beeps and static is all what the computer needs to load the program. These sounds were music to most people's ears when dial-up modems became popular. Anyway, before I end my cassette narration, I discuss on how I got my voice in this cassette. Well, I learned the hard way that the mic on this Walkman doesn't double as a line in. So what did I do? I recorded the dialogue designed for this cassette first in Audacity, import that into the voice recorder, plug the lapel mic into the Walkman, and played recording through the recorder's built-in speaker. Yeah, no wonder why this was a bit troublesome. But it needed to be. I decided to buy the Attack of Pesky Robots remix soundtrack after this thing arrived.
Now, I wonder what happens when you actually flip the switch on this Walkman after it's recording in normal. Well, it's now, well, the same was true on this side, on double. Well, it goes a bit faster. Like a chipmunk. And the other thing you should never use pre-record tape in the double side.
Yeah, you can tell how to get this thing done first, as you can tell. Now, I need to discuss a few toys that uses the compact cassette. First, it's the Fisher-Price PXL 2000. A camcorder aimed at kids. That one records in black and white, has a very fast cassette mechanism, the time is very short, 15 frames a second, has a very low resolution. Very low by today's standards, but this is a kid's toy, so compromises had to be made. Another toy that uses them is the 2XL Tiger version. It was essentially a re-release of the Mego version that replaced the 8-track deck with a compact cassette deck, but functions similarly to the former by having 4 separate buttons. How it works is that one of those buttons actually plays one of the left or right stereo tracks. That feature is also present on some cassette decks, namely toys. Of course, if you put one of those types of cassettes in a regular cassette deck, things would be very weird. However, a more well-known one that used them was also made by Tiger Electronics. The Talkboy was a line of voice recorders that used either cassettes or solid-state media, but the former has been made more famous during its appearance in Home Alone 2, Lost in New York. More accurately, the toy line was created for the movie, at the request of writer John Hughes. 20th Century Fox later gave Tiger permission to release a home version of Talkboy, and the rest is history. Anyway, I believe that's it for the compact cassette, but there are some other cassette types we need to talk about.
Following the success of the compact cassette, Philips then made the mini cassette, a smaller version of compact cassette that was used only for dictation. As such, it runs at half of the compact cassette at 15/16 inches per second. Really not super for music. But that's not all.
The tape speed doesn't go at a constant pace, resulting in a very monstrous voice.
Yeah, the mini cassette never took off, despite being featured in Clockwork Orange. That's the 1971 movie, if anyone's wondering. A better competitor, the Microcassette, became the solution, since not only that runs a constant pace, but also had a few pre-recorded cassettes made. But its purpose is still dictation, mind you. At least it sounds better than the mini cassette. The Microcassette was developed by Olympus in Japan, in case if you're wondering. That's the same Olympus that's still around today. They're more well known for their cameras until they spun off their camera division in 2020 as Digital Solutions Corporation. That division still does digital cameras and audio recorders, which coincidentally are also types of electronics I use from Sony in this video, including this Microcassette recorder, which surprisingly had its belt got loose, so I couldn't demonstrate it.
Yeah, because this thing is broken, I couldn't be able to demonstrate properly. I mean, I did try repairing it, but to no avail, and have no belt. But
To make up for that, here's some audio recording on Audacity to give you an idea of what it would sound like coming from here. A bit humble, mind you.
anyway, time to talk about a cassette type that I actually mentioned in the beginning of this episode. The RCA Victor tape cartridge, which, as I mentioned, was nearly a convenient reels and caddies system. It's like a hybrid between a compact cassette and open reels. The latter specifically, as the speed is a lot faster, mean sounds a lot better, and it has a braking mechanism to prevent unspooling. It was a huge failure outside the educational market, which has a huge niche. But wait a minute, Victor, where have I heard that name before? Oh, right! RCA used to own the Victor company in Japan, also known as JVC. That's right, the same company that created the VHS format. However, during World War II, which I won't give details, RCA and JVC split, resulting in JVC becoming a separate company. However, I will talk about another convenient tape on spool system. Another convenient cassette tape caddy. Ugh. Ugh. Anyway, next section. The Elcaset is Sony's independent tape format that sounded better than the Compact Cassette. I say independent because there are no pre-recorded Elcaset tapes, at least during the format's lifespan. This one is just a convenient reel-to-reel in a plastic housing, much like the RCA Victor tape cartridge. However, tape is a bit like video cassette, and a bit more fragile. But since you can't touch tape fill with it, it makes sense. Bottom line, this format wasn't intended to be competitive. It was made to get people to record their own music off the radio without fumbling with messy tape and spools, since Sony still made compact cassettes alongside their Elcaset. Now, if Sony made their biggest audio cassette, they would make the smallest. The NT format is the world's smallest cassette tape in existence. This one is an outlier and oddball in this video. Instead of recording in analog like the previous ones, this one records digitally. As such, the quality was very and notably high. Still, we're hearing words more clearly compared to previous tapes. Notice what I said, hearing words more clearly there. Well, that's because much like the mini and microcassette, they're often used for dictation, but because it also has things like stereo and a seamless auto reverse and a better sound quality, this one has potential for music, but didn't catch on. Well, save for one cassette for testing purposes. The NT stands for non-tracking, which refers to the technology used in the NT decks. Instead of pulling the tape through the record and play head, they use a helical scan technology, much like the VHS format, which I talked about in the final weird episode before I used an intro. NT tapes are also used in the Deasonics backup system, as seen in this other episode of LGR, a video I recommend. Anyway, we have one more cassette to discuss. And oh boy, this is something not meant for audio. Yep, Daddy's made a cassette format called the DECO cassette system, an early low-cost alternative to just buy an extra arcade cabinet. It was used in early Daddy's arcade games like Burger Time and Lock and Chase. How it works is that you put the tape in a specialized reader that will burn the game code onto the correct chips. Now that was even before JAMA became the norm. Unfortunately, it would fail time, and as such, Daddy's would use standard PCBs. Alright. Well, anyway, that's all I was say for. Or actually, there's actually one more thing. There are these story cassette tapes that allow to have a book read aloud to you as long as you're following along. And they're just standard compact cassettes. Yeah. They're actually basically. Let's see how the compact cassette with the original that was. Many of these audios are on YouTube, so if you want to figure out them, you can just find them on YouTube. How they work is that if you want to turn the page, a chime is heard. That's your cue to turn the page. Yeah, you can tell how popular they are. And vinyl records can also have stories in them. They actually use a non-standard 16 2/3 revolutions per minute. The same one used in the Seedberg BMS 1000. I'll talk about vinyl records at a later date. Anyway, guess that's it for this episode of VintageTech. Next episode, we're going to talk about the Leapfrog Leap Pad. But before we end, I'm going to say this is actually the first episode of VintageTech, outside of short, where I had to use my new tripod, which is actually a monopod with 3 legs. And yeah, now I don't need to worry about one of them breaking. Because if one of them break, I can just continue to use them until another one breaks. Well, okay, I'm talking about the little fasteners, but you get the idea. Anyway, don't forget to like and subscribe and ring the little bell to be notified by my latest video. I'll see you later. if I had to make this one a rush because I just need to get this one done. And there are some things that may not be accurate, but here's something I surprised you. I actually wrote the script without using any research. Why is that? Well, I watched so many videos on most of these formats and knew about them that I figured I did not even ever do my research. So, kudos to those people who got me lucky writing the script. Well, for the audio recordings. Now, here's their behind the scenes. I did the face and camera scenes before the rest of the audio. I figured I should save myself some time and trouble doing them. So if you're wondering why things look a bit odd, you'll know why.
Now, there's one thing I definitely forgot to bring up in the Compact Cassette section, is that one common way most people wind cassettes back in the day is by using something what's called a Bic pen. Specifically the hexagonal one. It catches the wheel just enough so that they could be wound. In fact, they actually sold a mechanism similar to that allows you to, wind the cassette. But using a Bic pen is more cheaper and convenient. But what about a pencil? Well, yeah, it's been a meme. But in Japan, they have very thick pencils. Okay, not too thick. But you get the idea. Now, there's one more thing I want to show you. Remember that I mentioned about 120 minute cassettes? Well, here's one from TDK. And yeah, there is something already recorded onto here, and the write protect notches are already broken, so I can't over it. But yeah, this is what a 120 cassette looks like I have. And looking at it, they're actually, they're not really bigger. They just made the tape a bit thinner on it.